Nicola, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Jack Sweeney. I spent the best part of 10 years working for some big household name brands, the likes of Vax and Karcher, in a multitude of sales and marketing roles. And then almost a year ago now, started the business that I run today called JDS Strategist, which is very much focused on supporting brands just like yours with all things commercial strategy. And before we dive into our agenda for today, I just wanted to make reference to two webinars that this one really follows on from. So the first, of course, is Steve's fantastic market updates from last week, both DIY and housewares, but also a webinar that I did for BHETA members back in October, which presented a broad framework for how to build a winning commercial strategy. I know a lot of you have watched both of these, but I would encourage you possibly after this, definitely not now, but after this, maybe just give those a read or a watch, and the links will be available by myself or Nicola. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about data and how do we use data to identify insights to drive growth. And of course, the first stage of that is what data do you need and where can you find it? So we'll spend some time going through some really pragmatic tips and tricks on what you can do here. Once you've got the data, you then need to make sense of it all, because data is worthless without insight. So how do we piece it all together to derive action and thus value? And then finally, Steve has asked me to do just a couple of slides on how you use the data, the insights, the actions to then support your retailers and help strengthen those relationships, ultimately to grow your business. So we will touch on that at the very end. Those of you that have watched my webinars before, or we've spoken, I know I've spoken to a couple of you in the last few months, know that we use this strategic strength model for pretty much all of our client engagements. And what we are doing today is going into detail on the step between evaluate performance and identify truth, the synthesizing of all of that data to understand really what is happening in your market. So we're going into detail on this stage today. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of the presentation, I just want to share this very important principle, which is that data comes first. You go data to insight, never insight to data. And what I mean by that is if you split this visual down the middle, data to information to knowledge to insight, on the left-hand side, and the first step is all about figuring out the truth. Objective, truthful market data, no opinion or assumptions, or dare I say egos taken into that process of finding data to discover insights. You need to be ruthlessly objective when you're going out and finding all of this information. Only then, once you have the data, and we get to step two, which is how do we make sense of it all, should you think about overlaying your intuition, your experiences, and your expertise. But you must start, first and foremost, with an obsession about discovering the truth. That is very important. And another note is many of my clients and brands I talk to focus a lot of attention on macro trends. And this is a very simple pestle analysis. I'm sure almost all of you are aware of this. It's just a way to collect what's happening from a political right through to a legal perspective that may impact your market. And what I would say about this is, whilst these are very important and you should absolutely have them somewhere documented so they're in mind, is the shorter term the plan that you're finding data for to implement a change or something, the less important these are. I sometimes see external macro trends overemphasized from brands and clients' perspective. Now, when it's a longer term plan, a business and brand strategy or product development programs, absolutely these should be at the forefront of your planning. But the shorter term the planning becomes, 6 or 12 month go-to-market strategies, for example, arguably the less important these become, but always worth considering. And I know a hot topic at the moment, of course, with topics like Brexit, COVID, sustainability, plastic free, etc. But just a note on that before now we get into the micro, the market data, which is where we're going to spend the rest of our time today. So Just a reminder to what we quantify a market as at JDS. It has three core elements. So we have the companies, which of course is yourselves and your competitors, both in market and out of market. So which categories are adjacent to yours, which might divert consumer attention. Always important to think who are your in-market competitors and your out-of-market competitors. Then we have channels, DIY, electrical, mass merchandiser, e-commerce, direct to consumer. So these are the sales channels that your products are being pushed through, ultimately to reach the customer. And remember, I talked about this back in October, the distinction between customers and consumers. Customers buy the product and consumers use the product. And that's an important distinction in some markets. And in a lot of DIY and gardening and home and garden products, often it's a joint household decision. And more on that maybe in another webinar. Right, what are the 5 fundamental questions? When we go off and we seek to find data, what are the 5 main things that we do, at least at JDS? Because I am literally walking through our process today. And the first one, of course, is how big is the market? How big is the market that you operate in versus adjacent markets? And then what is your historic and your forecasted performance versus that market? Are you under or overperforming? So that's number 1. Number 2 is, of course, who are the competition? And remember that cross-category consideration, both in-market and out-of-market competition. But what we're looking to discover here really is what's your share of the market, not just sales. Now, a lot of you will be familiar with data from the likes of GfK and Nielsen that gives you market share based on sales, but also what's your share of demand, something called share of search that we're going to come on to in a couple of slides' time. Number 3 is where is the market distributed? So which channels play a prominent role in your market? What are the splits? Is it 40% DIY, 30% e-commerce, or is it something different? And then most importantly, what is your share of each of those channels? Again, where are you under and overperforming? Then the final 2 questions within these 5 fundamental questions are very customer focused. So number 4, how do customers shop? What is their journey and experience? And I'm talking here about identifying really key touch points, because unlike the data to insight process that needs to be very linear, customers, human beings, are incredibly irrational creatures and don't tend to do things in the order that we want them to. So we're not trying to map an exact customer journey here, but we're trying to understand what are the important touch points and how do customers behave through that shopping journey. And then number 5 is who is the customer? Arguably the most important question on this slide is from an age, a gender, a location, an income perspective, so all the demographical data, but also enriching that with their attitudes towards technology or sustainability, and also their behaviors. How do they behave within a particular market context, and within the market being a very important point there. And I have to caveat this entire presentation with this, that actually the best way to get truthful, objective data on all 5 of these questions is to use market data providers for the first 3 and customer research agencies for the second 2. Now, of course, that costs a lot of money, and I'm sure most of you haven't joined today for me to tell you to spend a load of money on research and market data providers. So what I'm going to go through now on each of these questions is a process that at JDS we always follow. We always advocate research first and foremost, but we will do this instead of or as well as that research. So everything you're about to see costs nothing more than time and some expertise. All right, question number 1, how big is the market? Now, of course, there is fantastic data provided via global data through the market updates that Steve presents. I've got a couple of snippets here around total home enhancement, Q4 performance, the full year performance, how that segments into the larger subcategories of DIY, small electricals. And again, you can start to think about how are you performing, or how is your category performing in relation to these big, broad category numbers. That then gets broken down further in Steve's presentations, down into heavy DIY, decorative, garden, outdoor living. Again, you can start to benchmark your performance versus these larger categories. Are you growing share or are you losing share? But I think the best slide that I would encourage you to look at, and probably where you see familiarity with what you would classify as a market, is the category coverage slide in Steve's deck, where it gets down into the granularity of sundries, decking, outdoor furniture, and barbecues. And one of the things that we always do at JDS is very simply go to Google and search, for example, barbecues market size UK. And if you are willing to spend some time trawling through not just page 1, but page 2, 3, 4, and 5 of results, and take a brush of creativity on piecing bits of data together and numbers together, I am yet to find an example where you can't have a decent stab of figuring out how big the market is without buying the actual data from the likes of GfK or global data. So use the power of Google. Go in, very simple, type in barbecues market size UK or whatever your category is, and start looking at what's free via the search results. Those eagle-eyed of you will notice I've misspelt barbecues here, and that's very deliberate, because misspelling your category term will often give even better data, because it's data that doesn't rank very well in the Google algorithm, but often provides some real insights for you. So that's just an extra tip. Question number 2, who are the competition? And the first thing I do when trying to understand a new market is, and particularly who are my clients' competitors, is I'll go to the retail sites that I know will have a decent proportion of that category sales. So if it's DIY and gardening, it's likely B&Q play a large part in this sector. Amazon tends to be a very good source of information for pretty much every category. But it's not just having a look at the brands that these retailers list, and you can start to understand who the players are. Go a level deeper and start looking at number of listings. How many reviews do each of those listings have? You can typically apply a 10 times multiplier to reviews. So if something's got 1,000 reviews, it's probably at least sold 10,000 products since the inception of that product. So by, again, just looking at what's available in the public domain slightly differently, you can start to get a much better idea of who those competitors are and possibly how prominent they are in the market. 2 websites I've mentioned time and time again, answerthepublic.com and Google. Just put barbecues or TVs or vacuum cleaners into each of these tools and start to understand what is coming back from consumers, from actual human beings. Look at Google search and see who's paying for advertising, who's ranking well on the organic search results, which sit below the adverts. Again, you start to get a good idea of at least who's investing heavily in digital marketing, if nothing else. Of course, store observation is very powerful as well. Go out into stores and see who's got a lot of space on the racking. I mentioned share of search earlier, and this is one of the ways that you can get an idea of your share of search for free. So Google Trends is a free tool, and the example I've given you here is brand X, brand Y, and brand Z. I have to be very careful with confidentiality agreements, so I'm not able to give you specific data in this report, but you can see if you put your brand in and then your 3 or 4 largest competitors, or who you think are your largest competitors, this graph as an index will give you an idea of what share of search or what volume of search you have relative to those competitors. And if you have a Google Ads agency, if you're spending money on paid search, they can give you the actual search impressions. They may not like it, but they definitely can do it, and they should do it for free. And this will start to give you an idea of what your share of demand, your share of Google search is. This is a really hot topic at the moment in the world of advertising. And then to take it a step further, again, this is what I do. If I have got a profile of 4 or 5 important and or interesting competitors for a client, I will download all of their annual accounts. I will read their strategic reports. I will go through all of their news and social feed channels, also outside industry experts, because that gives me a more objective opinion, and just generally deep observation and analysis. Again, it costs time, it costs some expertise, but it doesn't cost a penny. Question number 3, which channels are the market distributed through? And again, the BHETA market update is a great starting point here. There's a lot of talk at the moment, of course, around online and what COVID is doing to accelerate that e-commerce trend. But I think some of the best data I see in these market updates are the detailed retailer accounts, what's going on in each of the large retailers in particular markets. And we'll come on to that again towards the end of the presentation on that retailer section. Again, use the power of search, use the power of Google, use the power of Answer the Public. This is a screenshot from me typing in barbecues. Again, Answer the Public is completely free for 2 searches a day, I believe. I've searched barbecues and I can start to see what people are searching for specifically when they're looking for sale. So Amazon ranks higher than eBay, which ranks higher than B&Q. The darker the green, the more search volume there is through that term. And if you go into the tool and you start exploring it, there's a lot of data behind these visualizations. And if you pay, I think, $99 a month, so it's not free, but it's small expenditure, the insights you can get are enormous. Again, we use the paid account a lot at JDS. So getting an understanding for channels. And again, general store and physical store observation, very good. Number 4, how do customers shop the market? Those of you that watched my webinars last year will have seen this slide. This is, in its most simple form, the customer journey for pretty much any consumer product. And what this is showing you is that at some point, a trigger goes off in the customer's mind. The sun starts to shine, the grass starts to grow, they pull the lawnmower out the garage and it's broken and thus they need a new one. So that's the trigger that pushes someone into a market. And what we're focusing on at this stage, at least, at this stage of the market mapping process, is what's happening once the trigger goes off. What's the shopping experience? And again, use the likes of Google and Answer the Public and retailer sites and all that stuff to get additional insight into what people are searching, what the volumes are on particular terms. There's lots of data there. But actually, what I really, you may not be able to see this actually because it's under my face, but the first thing I always recommend to clients is be the customer, right? So imagine you are buying whatever product it is that you sell and walk the journey like you would as a customer. Now, you have to watch for bias here because you work for the company and you know the company, so you're not really anything like your target audience. So the next stage would be to observe customers. I'm not saying be the creepy person in B&Q sat in the corner that's watching everybody, but what I am saying is take a general interest in just observing people as you are walking around the stores that sell your products. And also, if you've got family or friends that you know are in market to buy your category, talk to them, watch them as they search Google and they flip between websites to understand what their journey's like. And then finally, talk to your customers. You know, you will have access through customer service, possibly e-commerce. It's very easy to open a dialogue with customers, particularly if you potentially offer them incentives or other things, which we'll come on to on the next slide. But there's a lot, again, here you can do without spending lots of money on shopper marketing research to understand better what the journey is and how customers shop. But finally, and arguably the most difficult, but the most important to do for free is who. You know, at a deep level, who is your customer? And you have lots of data, I'm sure. You'll have your website analytics. So Google with a bit of tracking code can tell you who's visiting your website from a gender and an age perspective, and also what their other interests are through tracking. If you're selling direct to consumer, you'll have a lot of e-commerce and sales data. And of course, pretty much all of you will have a level of inbound customer service inquiries, and all of that is customer data that you can then use to do very cost-effective research, be it very simple online surveys, it might be short 10 or 15-minute telephone interviews, but you have to be aware of bias here. And I'm going to tell you a short story at the risk of overrunning my time, which is I was working for a company, and we were getting a lot of data through product registration, and we were using this data then for email marketing. But what we came to realize, it was only less affluent customers that were registering their products. Yet, as you would as a brand owner, you were pushing all of your most premium products through your marketing communications. So And that's just a real life example of how you need to be aware of the bias when you are using your first party data, because the retailers own the relationship in most of our cases. Unless you've got a very strong share of sale direct to consumer, your retailers own that data relationship with the customer. Now, I encourage you to work with them. You'll all know how much they charge for access to this data, but if the relationship is strong and it's coming from a collaborative point of view, then I think there's always opportunity there. The final point I wanted to touch on, which isn't a free solution, but it is a cost down solution, is using an off-the-shelf segmentation. And those of you, again, that have watched previous presentations will know I'm a big believer in segmenting and targeting the market. And Experian is the best out there. And I say that with no affiliation. We work with them. I use their tools, but they are the best and most data-driven consumer segmentation model. And they've just relaunched Mosaic 7. I'm going to try and show you a demo of this. So let's see if this works. If I make this larger, let's see, and just quickly put my details in at the top. Right, so I can go into the dashboard. This is what you've just seen on my slide. If I go into the segment country living, oh, there we go, country living, you can see some very top line information about who they are from a demographics perspective, how responsive they are to advertising, what their technology adoption is like in the household. This is great. It's very top line and broad. What you can start to do is understand where they are in the country and at what propensity they are in each county or in each region. And actually, as a strategist, like I am and at JDS, we use the real data. And there are about 2,500 to 3,000 data points just in Experian on each of these segments. And you can start to go into, let's go into values and personality. Let's go into communication. You can start to understand if this particular segment is influenced by reviews online, which they're not in this case, or if they're uncomfortable using online banking. I mean, there is so much data in here that is very applicable to both planning and execution. So just to give you an idea of what is available, doesn't cost tens of thousands of pounds, but it does cost a little bit of money. But an off-the-shelf solution might be an option to get a better understanding of who the customer is. And that is critical because the customer now has all the power. It used to be brands back in the 80s and 90s. It then became retailers as customers thought retailer first when it came to shopping. And then the internet happened and social media and e-commerce and everything else. And now at the click of a button via mobile, computers, iPads, the customers have the power. So you have to put them at the heart of all of your planning and implementation. And I'm not going to read this word for word, but it's my favorite quote on the topic from the founder of Walmart, Sam Walton, that is effectively saying there's only one person really that matters in the business, and that is your customer. So put them at the heart of all of that activity. Okay, we've got the data. We've got hopefully a bit of market research, as well as all of the stuff that I've just talked through around using Google and Answer the Public and observation. What do you then do with it all? And I just want to remind us of the importance of the linearity of data and then insight. So you've got all your data. Now we need to make sense of it. We need to join the dots. We need to spot the gaps, and we need to find the light bulb moments. And this is a very messy process. This should not look like a polished presentation or a wonderful deck that you would present to retailers. It is whiteboard, sticky notes, flip charts type territory. And I've got an example here. Now, please don't read too much. This is an actual example from a past client of mine, but it was a friend of mine in the world of B2B. There is nothing relevant on here for consumer products, I can assure you. I just wanted to use it as a way of visualizing what it should look like. And this is a very early iteration. It got far messier than this, I can assure you. But what you're looking for here are either quick wins. So does 30% of the market trade through e-commerce and you've only got a 5% share going through e-commerce? You know, is there a particular customer group that buys a lot of your product category, but you don't tend to sell any products to them? So these are the quick gaps, the commercial profile versus market. The longer term stuff is what I call blue ocean. I don't call it blue oceans. This is from a very famous strategy book called Blue Ocean Strategy. And this is about trying to find uncontested market space. So a consumer segment that could and should buy a particular product, but that doesn't. And it's very customer focused, but this is much longer term by design. Stop yourself jumping to conclusions. That's a very deliberately slowed down point there, because I see this a lot, is that we'll put this up in a client workshop and within 5 minutes, there are already all the answers and a plan for what we're going to do. But the light bulb moments, the dots being joined, the moments that are going to give you breakthrough growth are not going to come when you're sat at your desk staring at a white wall. They are going to come when you're walking the dog, or you're in the shower, or you're lying in bed at night and you can't sleep. It's when your brain will slows down that it has time to process all of this data, put it together and make sense of it all. So give yourself time. If you want an actual number, at least 4 weeks of collecting the data and then reflecting on it before you start to implement any changes. And a final point from us is that always consider the full commercial mix. Don't just focus on, should I be doing social media or TV? Think about product. Is the proposition right? Is our pricing strategy right? Should we be promoting? Should we be skimming? There's lots of decisions to be made in there. Of course, distribution we've spoken about at length, and then finally communications. But don't just focus on one area at once. Stay general and stay broad, and then niche down into the specific initiatives from there. So we've got all the data. We've identified the truth, we've got insights. The next step would be to create a framework. Now, this is where you take your insights and you put them into an actual business plan. So scenario planning, budget forecasting, people, process and technology changes, et cetera, et cetera. We haven't got time to go into that today. That's probably a webinar for a future date. But what I did want to touch on is the stage after that, which is where you take your plan and you must activate it through people, whether it's your colleagues, your employees, your partners, or of course, your retailers. And that's what we're going to touch on very quickly now at the end of the presentation. Now, spoiler alert, retailers don't care about you or your brand. Now, that might be a slightly strong comment, but in principle, start from here, start from right. They don't really care about us, what we're doing, what our story is. They have their own agendas, right? And they have their own commercial targets. So you need to flip the table and think, right, based on our data and all of our insights and our new commercial plan or strategy or whatever it is that you've used this process for, how do we use that to support them delivering their agenda? And that means you need to bespoke every single new product presentation, retailer pitch or acquisition, even range reviews to their model and their priorities, and use that data that is in the BHETA market update on what's important to B&Q right now, what's important to John Lewis right now. These businesses are going through huge changes. How can you match what you're doing from a market perspective to what they're doing, ultimately to create a win-win scenario? Demonstrate category competence, So this is one of the greatest benefits a challenger brand can do. There's a lot of big brands out there that through possibly egos, or they just get complacent, they stop demonstrating that they're the category champion, that they know more about this particular product group than anybody else. And as a challenger brand, if you can do a really good job of showcasing how much you know about the market based on all of this data and insight work, and then how that translates into a plan to help you, the retailer, grow and take a higher share of the market, you're going to get noticed and you're going to get a bigger bang for your buck than you typically would being a challenger brand. The other point I always stress is think P2P, which is person to person. I actually hate that phrase, but I think it's relevant in this context, which is you have a buyer, and that buyer is a person, and they are not motivated by delivering their company's results or delivering your results, certainly not. They're driven by being promoted or hitting their profit targets so they get paid their bonus, or looking good in front of peers or superiors. So what is it that they're really chasing? And again, how can you use this data and this market work to help them achieve that? Again, focus on them. And then finally, always think multidiscipline. Don't make it a transactional sales buyer relationship. You know, as soon as possible in that first meeting or in subsequent meetings, roll out your marketing competence, your operations excellence, and make sure you're developing relationships across the retailer, not just seller to buyer. That's where I see a lot of smaller companies get into trouble. The more broad you can make it, again, relating it all back to your planning through your data, the more likely you are to build a much stronger collaborative relationship. So as always, 3 key takeaways. The first, unsurprisingly, is start with data, seek the truth, be objective, accept that what you've been doing for the last 12 months might be completely wrong based on new data, and then take that data and turn it into insights by joining the dots, the light bulb moments, forward then into planning. Number 2 is just the sheer power of search. Okay, the power of Google, Answer the Public, all of those tools are there for free to help you with pretty much every stage of that process. And whilst there is some expertise required in making sure the data is not misinterpreted, if it's done right, it's so powerful, and there is so much valuable information out there for free. Finally, be customer centric. Again, probably unsurprising coming from me, but really important to put the customer at the heart of all of your planning, right through the process from data collection through to insights and through to planning and ultimately implementation, because the customer has all the power now and will decide ultimately the fate and whether the plan is going to be successful or not. And that is it from me. So